Welcome back to News & Co with me, Bev Turner, sitting here for Michelle. This week, still with me, Lord Shaun Bailey, Conservative peer, and Paul Embery, trade unionist and broadcaster. So, plans are reportedly in the pipeline to transfer criminals to Estonian jails in a bid to tackle Britain's overcrowding prison crisis. The Estonian Justice Minister, Liisa Pakosta, revealed that a number of countries are interested in using Estonia's unused prison space. Home Office Minister Angela Eagle here has refused to rule it out. So should we send our prisoners to Estonia? Paul, I'm sort of all right with this, I have to say. I think if we haven't got the spaces, I don't care where you put people if they've committed crime. So, as long as it's not costing us more money, I'm all right with it.
Let's just be clear, we've scrapped the Rwanda scheme, but we've fired up the Estonia.
You couldn't write it, could you?
Yeah. So illegal migrants mustn't go to Rwanda, but convicts must go to Estonia. I'd rather them over there than on the streets here, if that's what it takes, to be honest. I don't think it's a particularly good idea, but shows what an undeveloping country we are. Shows how serious our problems are in terms of infrastructure and planning, that we just can't build anything. Our prison capacity is creaking, and we just, you look at nuclear, you look at railways, you look at the prison system, you look at housing. We are, frankly, utterly useless these days as a society in terms of infrastructure and planning, and how it ever got to a point where we're thinking as an advanced industrial modern democracy in Western Europe that we are having to send some of our prisoners to Estonia because we don't have the capacity here is frankly absurd. But it's an indictment of where we are, I think.
Well, it suggests that Estonia is more successful than us, doesn't it? They must have more prison places and fewer criminals. How have they done it?
Well, it's much smaller population, different makeup of people. International comparisons are normally useless as far as I can see.
But pretty much communist till about 25, 30 years ago, and look how...
I mean, you need to take a deep dive. The point of, when I read this story, I was like, wow, there again, hypocrisy, because this was first mooted by Alex Chalk, the then Justice Minister, and the Labour Party came down, they descended and said, this shows that you're disorganised and this, that and everything, they're really against it. Now, when they're in government, all of a sudden it looks like something they'll have to consider. To do it would be a bold step. Wow, it'd really be a bold step. And you'd have to sort through who do you send, why do you send, what do you do about rehabilitating them, how do they see their family, how long for, what level of offence. It's one of those things where the devil would be in the detail, but there's no denying if a government took that step, they would be able to point to a serious, bold action.
It would be embarrassing on the global stage, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be embarrassing to think that we've got so many people who are now criminals and so few, like you say, Paul, so little investment in our criminal infrastructure?
But I think people spot that about our country anyway, Bev, to be honest. I think they see us...
That we're just embarrassing?
Well, I think they see us as an undeveloping country and, we don't make anything anymore. Our manufacturing sector has been absolutely decimated. Our industrial base more widely...
We make criminals.
Has been absolutely decimated. Our economy has been flatlining for 14 years or whatever it is now. Governments seem to be absolutely in hock to the liberal woke agenda and completely out of kilter with many millions of people across mainstream Britain. I've never detected before now such a lack of enthusiasm in our national and trust and faith in our national and civic local institutions. And I think that, especially in these days where we're so kind of interconnected around the globe, I think people elsewhere on the globe kind of spot that and sense that Britain isn't anything like the force that it once was. And partly that's because the world changes and economy changes. You have emerging economies, China and stuff like that. But I think we've lost that instinct where we used to just get stuff done. Where we had a manufacturing base that was the envy of the world, and we were a real kind of industrial and economic powerhouse. And that wasn't a natural phenomenon where all of that died away. I think that was because of the active and conscious decisions of politicians going back about 4 decades or more. It didn't have to be that way. But I think the way that the country has been managed, and particularly the way that the economy and industry has been managed, I think it was inevitable that we were going to end up where we are.
So that's 14 years of Conservative
Paul's
rules,
just
Shaun.
taking us for a meander through history. I slightly disagree, Paul. I do take your point that we are beginning to look underdeveloped. But there's two things I'd say. If you travel around the rest of the world, you very quickly realise actually we have a very well-developed country. That's the first point I'd make. The second point
we can still be undeveloping.
Yeah. The second point I'd make is that much of the world has caught up. You know, they've caught up, they've changed, we've adapted, we still have an enormous economy and we're still forging ahead in some ways. Where I think you are correct, we don't get things done. And what we've done, we've given so many people with a tiny stake a very big say, and it's derailed. I don't consider left and right anymore. I think that's passé as a concept, but I'd have to say people on the left have been very adept at destroying the notion of the British nation. If you say anything British, anything family, anything church, royal, you know, anything traditional, they'll either tell you you're homophobic, racist, whatever. And if you keep that line of inquiry and pressure going for long enough, people start to believe you and people are ashamed of the country.
Look at HS2. Now, I wasn't a fan of HS2. I wasn't a supporter of it. I thought it was wrong from the outset. But even if you were a fan of it, just look at how long, look at the process, the bureaucracy that it got bogged down in terms of planning and so on. And look how that piece of infrastructure just took years and years and years, and it's still not here, and it isn't going to be, and it isn't going to be here in the form that was first planned. Now, a country like China, whatever its faults, and it's got many, a country like China would have had that done in a year or two.
Wouldn't that have meant bulldozing over people's houses and businesses?
Not necessarily, because in China
building
they've got a vast amount of space, and much of it is still pretty sort of undeveloped.
But I mean, if we'd taken the approach...
Oh, you mean here,
yeah,
for
if we'd done that here, we would have upset a lot of people by just building a track over their home.
This is the challenge for a nation, isn't it? Do you give every little individual the power of the government? Or
not this government. They're not going to give any individuals the power.
Some would argue that in the wrong arena they do. Now, I remember when they wanted to extend the runway at Heathrow, I went to those villages and thought, you're right, they shouldn't extend this runway. So, you know, there's always a winner and a loser and an up and a downside. But I really do believe that Paul is correct. We are frozen. We are not delivering even for ourselves, and we're very poor at planning these things as well. I want the Labour government to succeed because it means the people of this country do well. I don't believe they're going to, but the one place where I really, really hope they succeed is with planning so that we can change the way we deliver for our country.
I want to this point that you made, Shaun, about the fact that it almost feels like a national identity is no longer anything to be proud of. And I completely agree with you, by the way, on the idea that the left versus the right are redundant terms. We've had that discussion on this show before, Paul. These two stories, Rwanda and also this one about prisons, basically the conflict is between a globalist view of the world. You will take our migrants, you will take our prisoners, we will take your migrants, which is much more working with other countries, and a more kind of isolationist view of the world, which is really the ticket that Reform stood on at the election and surprised everybody by the idea they were saying, let's put the UK first, put Great Britain first, we will build the infrastructure here. Maybe that's how we have to view politics now, more of a globalist versus a nationalistic view of where we get our growth, where we place our finances, how we prioritise the tax money.
I think people think we should work with other countries, work in harmony with other countries, trade with other countries, have good relations with other countries. But I detect that there is no appetite whatsoever among most people for a kind of borderless world. I think most people are still supportive of the idea of the independent nation state. It's the best democratic unit, I think, has proven over time to be the best democratic unit at its highest level in terms of democracy, in terms of people feeling some sort of connection with the government and being able to elect and remove the people who govern them. I think once you go beyond the concept of the nation state and you get into, supranational institutions like the EU, for example, I think that's when the democratic elasticity, as some people call it, then breaks, because people think, actually, this is just like a faceless bureaucracy. I can't elect and remove these people. I don't feel that I have any control, any democratic control over them. I feel that they have a control over my life and what goes on in my community. And I think, I've argued for some time now, I think the world needs to de-globalise. I don't accept that globalisation is a natural phenomenon. I think it's a man-made thing. And I think the world, and I'm not saying we should be little Englanders or that we should, be a society that, thinks it can just get by on its own without help and trading with other people and with other countries. But I do think we need to de-globalise in the sense that we need to reinforce the concept of the nation state, because that's what people still have faith in.
I'm with you, Paul, but
is.
I don't hear that message at all from those in power.
I think to have that conversation on the doorstep, it just wouldn't apply. And this may surprise me, because if you stood on the doorstep, I've stood on many thousands of doorsteps and started talking about globalism stuff. There's only one set of people you really be talking to, the highly educated ones who want that. And when I hear that conversation, by the way, I largely agree with what Paul has said, what I hear is a class war. Because what was interesting when Brexit happened, you had many people from the middle classes, in their view, rightly saying we should stay. And for them, they're correct, it worked. Europe paid them, they made big money, they were able to raise the kind of funds that you couldn't just do in one nation because they were spread out. But of course, if you're a normal working man or woman, Europe didn't work for you in quite the same way. And I worry that if we go further down the road to globalism, we will get a real split. Paul often talks about the inequality in income and inequality. If we go the globalist route, then we will really see that.
Starmer is the ultimate globalist. Do you remember him famously answering that question, where would you rather be, Westminster or Davos? And he said Davos.
Well, I'd love
You've
to see
got Tony Blair behind the scenes, who just is, he'd love to be president of the one world government, Tony Blair, I'm sure.
What did COVID prove? COVID proved the problems of global supply chains, that actually, if you simply rely on global supply chains and say, we believe in a global world, we'll buy into globalization, the new global market, and we'll import loads of stuff from our PPE from China and wherever it is, and all of a sudden a crisis hits. At that moment, we saw the problem with not having a domestic industrial base and not being able to make our own things.
I just want to make one tiny
to produce our own stuff, and that was a prime example.
I just want to make. I desperately don't want to sound like a little Englander, because to be clear, globalism has great strengths. The level of technology we've delivered, drugs for healthcare, all sorts of stuff, and people always should take that into account. But what we do need to do is understand how globalism doesn't work for every level of your society. What we do need to do globally, I think, that make the biggest impact is global-wide tax standards, because that would level the playing fields slightly. And when we talk about globalism, we talk about GDP. GDP is not distributed evenly, and therein lies some of the risk. And the idea that, one poor nation could take the rubbish and the other rich nation could take the best, I think is immoral. And that's why when people argue, they say, our NHS only works because it's full of foreigners. They shouldn't be happy about that. They should ask themselves, why are we pinching the best people from poor nations around the world?
Look at what globalisation has done for democracy in terms of the power now of the multinationals and the power and influence that they exert constantly over democratically elected national governments, where they can say to them, reduce your tax levels, reduce your corporate tax levels, reduce your regulation, your environmental standards, your workplace standards, employment law. And if you don't do that, then we're not going to come to your country. Or if we're already here, we're going to up sticks and go somewhere else where we can have those things. So the power of the multinationals as a result of globalisation
is growing.
It is growing,
and it's allowing them to exert enormous pressure on elected governments.
And that's the biggest transfer of wealth upwards in the last 4 years.
But
that debases
why I talk
about
class. International tax standards. So we're a bit harder to play us off against each other.
Yeah, interesting. Right, thanks, fellas.